They say you can measure a corporate empire's soul by the ambient temperature of its central server room and the lingering scent of fried copper, ozone, and desperation. At Vantage Logistics, where I served as the senior infrastructure and database architect, for 12 long years, our server baseline had stayed rock solid through 5 corporate restructuring cycles, 3 major database migrations, and 2 near-fatal ransomware attacks that would have bankrupted a lesser organization. I am Walter Miller, 54 years old, and for over a decade, I was the invisible backbone that kept the digital arteries of this multi-million-dollar logistics firm pulsing without a single second of unplanned downtime. I never demanded a flashy corner office, never posted self-congratulatory rants on professional networking platforms, and never cared about inflated corporate titles. I cared about system uptime, clean enterprise architecture, and ensuring that our nationwide fleet of 4,000 shipping trucks delivered freight on schedule to distribution centers across 50 states every single day. Over 12 years of quiet, meticulous labor, I knew every line of legacy code, every database dependency, every undocumented failsafe, and every background automation script that kept our corporate or operational machinery breathing smoothly through peak holiday rushes and severe weather disruptions. When I joined the company 12 years ago, the infrastructure was a fragile patchwork of fragmented databases held together by wishful thinking. I spent my early years rebuilding the entire architecture from scratch, working late into the night during emergency weekend shifts to create self-healing database clusters that could withstand sudden hardware failures without dropping a single customer transaction. I maintained detailed system logs dating back over a decade, quietly protecting the company from operational disaster while corporate executives took all the public credit. I had built a custom real-time monitoring dashboard that tracked processing loads across 60 server nodes, ensuring that memory leaks were caught hours before they could cause system slowdowns. I also established automated encryption key rotation protocols that kept our financial records completely secure from external threats. Everything changed the morning. Sienna Vance strutted into our annual strategic operations sink carrying a pink ring light, a custom crystal water bottle, and a smile that had been meticulously calibrated for a viral social media video. Sienna was 28 years old and had married the CEO's only son, Chad Vance, after a weekend hot yoga retreat in Sedona. Chad himself held a high-paying executive title without performing any real work, and his marriage to Sienna was treated by corporate leadership as a royal alliance. Less than 3 weeks after signing her marriage certificate, Sienna was parachuted into the organization as Chief Innovation Officer of Vantage Logistics by her father-in-law, Chief Executive Officer Richard Vance. Sienna possessed no technical background whatsoever, held 0 engineering credentials, and once openly asked during a high-level corporate security meeting whether Java was still a real programming language or just an artisanal coffee brand brewed in Seattle. She wore bright white designer stilettos onto the raised anti-static flooring of our main data center, referred to our industrial Unix mainframes as chunky legacy clutter, and complained that the green and amber LED status lights looked tacky on camera. She insisted to anyone who would listen that our entire enterprise network architecture needed a modern, aesthetic makeover to align with current digital trends. She even brought her pampered miniature dog into the server room during a live audit, taking selfies in front of glowing server racks while completely oblivious to the dust and static risks that threatened million-dollar hardware racks. She immediately renamed our internal communication channels to ridiculous buzzwords, forcing veteran engineers to join groups like Synergy Hub and Growth Vibes, while ignoring actual system maintenance reports. For 12 consecutive years, I had operated as the ultimate fail-safe for Vantage Logistics. When corrupt third-party API dependencies threatened to wipe out our vendor billing databases back in 2019, I was the ghost in the shell who spent 48 consecutive hours writing custom error-handling algorithms to restore full data integrity before the board members even poured their morning espresso. What Sienna and CEO Richard Vance completely failed to comprehend was that my most sophisticated automation frameworks, multi-node failover protocols, and real-time transaction reconciliation scripts were not corporate assets created during standard work hours. When I was hired 12 years ago, I consulted an independent intellectual property attorney to review my employment contract. Under explicit written addendums in my original agreement, drafted carefully in strict accordance with Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, I retained sole copyright ownership and exclusive intellectual property rights over all proprietary automation tools that I developed independently off hours on my personal hardware. The company enjoyed a non-exclusive, revocable license to execute those scripts only so long as I remained actively employed to oversee their operational maintenance and structural integrity. Upon termination of my employment for any reason, that license would instantly revert back to me, revoking the company's legal authorization to run my proprietary code. During that fateful morning meeting, Sienna stood beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the main executive conference room, like a pageant contestant trapped inside an engineering design review. She clicked through a series of colorful presentation slides that were littered with buzzwords she could barely pronounce, talking endlessly about paradigm shifts, corporate synergy, and scalable cloud ecosystem frameworks. She announced to the assembled team of veteran software engineers and network architects that our legacy infrastructure was holding the company back, and that Vantage Logistics was entering a bold new era of agile cloud transformation led by her vision. She smiled smugly, looked directly at the row of senior engineers who had built the company from the ground up, and declared that the organization urgently needed fresh blood, modern tools, and fewer dinosaurs occupying senior technical seats. She boasted about how she had already scouted external cloud vendors and promised the board that she could eliminate 50% of legacy IT overhead within 30 days. There was an audible clench across the room as 20 seasoned professionals realized that their decades of loyal service were being dismissed as outdated noise by an executive whose sole credential was her marriage certificate. I sat near the back of the conference table, maintaining absolute composure while sipping my black coffee. I watched Sienna toss out corporate platitudes while presenting a proposed cloud migration roadmap that was literally a stolen screenshot from an unverified public code repository. I thought about the complex domain name system failover protocols I had manually rerouted at 3 a.m. just last Tuesday, because Sienna's newly hired Greenhorn migration team forgot to map our secondary validation endpoints. I thought about the intricate datasets triggers I had authored back in 2018 that kept our core inventory tracking system breathing under peak holiday stress without dropping a single packet. I knew that without my constant manual interventions and quiet background cron jobs, Sienna's flashy cloud initiatives would disintegrate into total operational chaos within minutes of deployment. Yet I said nothing. I simply closed my leather notebook, offered a polite head nod, and allowed her to bask in her self-manufactured triumph while the room dissolved into awkward, tense silence. 48 hours after her grand presentation, a cold calendar invitation appeared in my corporate inbox. The subject line read simply, "Quick Sync HR, scheduled for 4:30 on a gloomy Thursday afternoon." There was no agenda attached, no context provided, and no project code referenced. In the corporate world, an unscheduled late afternoon human resources meeting on a Thursday is the electronic equivalent of an executioner wheeling a heavy guillotine into the main courtyard. Over my 12 years at Vantage Logistics, I had watched this scenario play out dozens of times. Experienced employees would be summoned to silent glass conference rooms at the end of the day, handed pre-typed termination envelopes, and escorted out of the building by security guards like common felons before the rest of the floor even noticed their absence. It was a cowardly corporate tactic designed to minimize pushback, avoid public scenes, and prevent departing engineers from warning their colleagues about impending cutbacks. When I stepped into the glass-walled human resources suite, Sienna was sitting casually on the edge of a polished mahogany desk, wearing a lavender designer blazer and swirling an iced matcha latte in a clear plastic cup. Beside her sat Lyle Simpson, the soft-spoken human resources manager, who looked thoroughly uncomfortable and refused to meet my eyes as I pulled back a heavy leather chair. Sienna offered a practiced hollow smile that radiated synthetic warmth under the humming office lights. She began speaking in a polished corporate tone, claiming that as part of the company's forward-looking modernization strategy, management had made the difficult decision to eliminate several legacy technical roles in order to streamline operational efficiency, cut unnecessary payroll bloat, and foster a more youthful, agile, and collaborative engineering ecosystem. The true motivation behind her speech was glaringly obvious to everyone in the room. I was 54 years old, earned a top-tier salary, reflecting my 12 years of deep institutional knowledge, and regularly pointed out severe structural flaws in Sienna's ill-conceived innovation proposals. To a 28-year-old chief innovation officer desperately trying to justify her inflated executive title and massive budget to the board of directors, my quiet technical authority was an intimidating reminder of her own incompetence. Lyle nervously slid a thick manila folder across the desk toward me, his hands visibly shaking as he adjusted his glasses. Inside was a standard severance agreement, offering 3 months of continued health insurance coverage under COBRA, provided that I signed a sweeping legal release, waiving all claims, surrendering all intellectual property rights, and agreeing to a strict non-disparagement clause that would prevent me from speaking publicly about company operations or executive misconduct. The folder also contained a restrictive non-compete clause designed to prevent me from taking a position with any regional technology firm for 2 full years. I read through the legal document with calm, practiced precision. Having conducted internal security audits of our vendor agreements for years, I instantly spotted the one-sided clauses designed to strip away my legal protections and hand over ownership of my personal software tools. I picked up a pen, neatly drew a single line through the intellectual property surrender clause, and handed the unsigned document back to Lyle across the table. I looked Sienna dead in the eye, my voice entirely steady. I will not sign away my proprietary automation scripts, nor will I waive my legal rights regarding improper termination notice under federal workplace laws. In fact, I reminded them that targeted layoffs of senior staff without mandatory 60-day notice directly violated Title 29 of the United States Code. Section 2101, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. Sienna tilted her head, her fake smile instantly hardening into a condescending sneer. She scoffed loudly, telling me that I was being absurdly stubborn, that legacy dinosaurs like me never understood modern corporate agility, and that my outdated scripts were completely irrelevant now that her team was deploying modern enterprise cloud solutions. She arrogantly added that in 2026, old-school architects were as obsolete as floppy disks, suggesting that at my age, I ought to retire quietly to a golf course rather than fight corporate progress. She even threatened to blacklist me from the local tech industry if I refused to sign the waiver immediately. Lyle cleared his throat nervously, asking if I had any final questions before turning over my security credentials to corporate security. I stood up slowly from the leather chair, unclipped my magnetic access badge from my lanyard, and laid it gently on the polished desk like a hand grenade with the safety pin freshly pulled. I looked Sienna directly in the face, my voice quiet, calm, and carrying the unshakable weight of absolute truth. "You have 15 minutes before the system fails," I said softly. 15 minutes before the unmonitored data pipelines overload, the third-party billing APIs lock out your client accounts, and the main logistics database goes pitch black. Tell your father-in-law, Chief Executive Officer Richard Vance, that I wish him the very best of luck. Sienna's face twitched slightly, her eyes flashing with a brief spark of genuine irritation before she let out a loud, condescending laugh. She told me to stop dramatic posturing, claiming that her new cloud migration platform would run circles around whatever ancient code I had left behind in the server room. She boasted that her outsourced consulting team had already prepared a replacement framework that rendered my 12 years of work completely obsolete. I offered no further argument, gave no angry speech, and did not raise my voice by even a single decibel. I turned on my heel, walked out of the human resources suite, and proceeded down the quiet carpeted corridor toward the main elevators. As the heavy elevator doors slid shut behind me, The invisible countdown of 1,000 proprietary failsafes had officially begun, ticking away in the silence of the automated server racks. Instead of driving straight home in a cloud of frustration, I walked 2 blocks down the street to Cafe Eastwood, a quiet neighborhood coffee shop, with warm brick walls and large glass windows that offered an unobstructed view of the 15th floor of the Vantage Logistics Tower. I ordered a hot cup of dark roast black coffee and a fresh cranberry scone, carrying them over to a secluded corner booth near the window. Outside, rain had begun to fall heavily over the city streets, reflecting the red and amber lights of evening rush-hour traffic. I sat quietly in the booth, watching the bright fluorescent windows of my former employer light up the darkening skyline like a massive glass vessel heading straight toward an unseen iceberg. The barista, Mark, handed me my coffee with a friendly smile, remembering that I used to stop by late at night after long server deployments. He had no idea that across the street, a 12-year corporate empire was about to experience total digital blackout. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee, feeling a sense of deep relief wash over me as the weight of 12 years of unappreciated stress melted away. My personal laptop sat open on the table before me, completely disconnected from the corporate intranet. Exactly 11 minutes after I had handed over my badge, the quiet atmosphere of the coffee shop was shattered by the rapid, continuous buzzing of my personal cell phone sitting face down on the wooden table. First came an urgent text message from Nigel Davies, a veteran procurement specialist who had worked alongside me for 8 years. Nigel wrote that the core vendor authentication module had just collapsed without warning, freezing all outgoing purchase orders and preventing 500 third-party freight carriers from generating digital bill of lading documents. 30 seconds later, a second text arrived from Brenda Thorne in corporate finance, stating that the automated nightly reconciliation engine had frozen solid, throwing hundreds of red system error notifications across every executive accounting dashboard. Then a junior developer named Gary called my cell phone, practically sobbing as he begged for the master administrative override password, explaining that the company's automated billing system had started issuing duplicate refund vouchers to clients across the country. What Sienna had failed to understand during her rushed corporate restructuring was that my proprietary automation scripts were not static text files, sitting harmlessly on a server hard drive. They were active, self-regulating microservices running on a non-exclusive license that automatically revoked itself the moment my active user credentials were terminated in the central directory. Under the provisions of Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. For 12 consecutive years, those background cron jobs had silently cleaned up corrupted database entries, rerouted failed network packets, sanitized incoming vendor data feeds, and bridged the massive compatibility gaps between our legacy enterprise resource planning system and Sienna's unvetted cloud tools. Without my licensed code running silently in the background, every raw system error that had been quietly suppressed for years suddenly erupted to the surface all at once, creating unhandled memory buffer overflows that locked up central processing units. Regional shipping hubs in Chicago, Dallas, and Atlanta ground to a complete standstill as automated sorting belts locked up and dispatchers watched their control screens freeze. Across the street on the 15th floor, total operational pandemonium had broken out across every department. The primary supply chain routing node crashed completely at 46 minutes past 4 o'clock. 10 seconds later, the single sign-on authentication gateway for our top 4 corporate clients refused connections, displaying a cryptic system error that locked out thousands of logistics managers nationwide. The internal corporate virtual private network throttled to a complete crawl, triggering an automatic security lockdown that locked out over 200 remote regional dispatchers. The automated customer support ticketing platform crashed hard, responding to furious client inquiries with an automated message that cheerfully chirped that the user session had expired and advised them to contact their system administrator, whom Sienna had just fired 15 minutes earlier. Customer support phone queues swelled from 5 minutes to 4 hours as angry distribution directors called from across the country demanding answers. Inside the corporate internal messaging channels, frantic posts were flooding every department group chat. Technicians, operations managers, and regional coordinators were screaming for help as transaction queues overflowed and real-time fleet tracking maps went completely dark. Then, a new message popped up in the general announcement channel from Sienna Vance herself. She wrote a hasty message begging everyone to remain calm, maintain a positive attitude, and embrace the transformational journey, adding a series of cheerful sparkles emojis and insisting that the team focus on solutions rather than placing blame. Her hollow corporate toxic positivity was met with dead silence from the engineering staff. Nobody responded because every engineer in the building was staring at their screens in horror, watching 12 years of operational stability unravel like a ball of yarn drop down an elevator shaft. The catastrophic collapse did not remain confined to internal IT operations for long. At 50 minutes past 4 o'clock, Chief Executive Officer Richard Vance was in the middle of delivering a high-stakes keynote presentation to a prospective group of institutional investors in the executive boardroom. His smartwatch vibrated 3 times in rapid succession, displaying a critical red alert protocol that our engineering department had established strictly for catastrophic enterprise infrastructure failures or active nation-state cyber attacks. Excusing himself with a strained smile, Richard rushed out of the boardroom and hurried down the hallway toward the central server room, his silk tie loosened and his face flushed with growing panic as executive assistants shouted news of client outages. Board members exchanged alarmed looks as the presentation screens went black mid-pitch, leaving the potential investors staring at blank walls. When Richard threw open the reinforced double doors of the data center, he found Sienna standing amidst the humming server racks, looking thoroughly bewildered while surrounded by 4 outsourced IT consultants whom she had hired 3 weeks prior at an exorbitant rate of $400 per hour. The consultants were frantically tapping on keyboards, sweating profusely, and searching internet forums for basic Unix terminal commands like sudo reboot. Richard demanded to know why the secondary backup protocols had not initiated automatically to restore the client portals. One of the senior outsourced technicians turned around, his face pale, and blurted out that the automated recovery frameworks were custom proprietary scripts created by Walter Miller, and that those scripts had ceased functionings the moment Walter's account was terminated under his explicit intellectual property licensing agreement. Sienna immediately pointed her finger at my empty desk, screeching to her father-in-law that I had intentionally sabotaged the corporate network on my way out the door to get petty revenge. But the chief network engineer stepped forward and corrected her instantly in front of the entire executive team. He stated clearly that Walter had not sabotaged a single file or deleted a single line of corporate code. Instead, Walter had simply revoked his personal proprietary license upon termination, leaving the company's unmaintained infrastructure to run on Sienna's unverified cloud configurations. The engineer explained that for months, Walter had been quietly working overtime to manually patch the massive security holes and architectural flaws created by Sienna's hasty innovation initiatives, preventing massive client losses on a daily basis. Within 2 hours, the company's legal department descended upon the executive suite like a swarm of hungry hawks, accompanied by senior corporate litigators. Corporate legal counsel began pulling internal communication logs, server audit trails, and vendor contracts. What they uncovered was a legal nightmare for the executive team. Legal discovered that 3 weeks prior, Sienna had sent an explicit internal message ordering junior staff to bypass mandatory compliance reviews and ignore legacy contract documentation, claiming that nobody cared about old legal protocols. This reckless action had resulted in the accidental expiration of critical third-party software licenses, leaving Vantage Logistics exposed to severe breach of contract claims from its largest commercial clients. When confronted by legal, Sienna attempted to blame junior developers, like Gary and HR manager Lyle, for the compliance failures, claiming they had misunderstood her instructions. Furthermore, legal realized that Sienna's sudden, Targeted firing of senior veteran engineers without required statutory notice violated explicit provisions of Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101, commonly known as the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. To make matters immeasurably worse, auditors uncovered evidence that compliance sign-off records had been improperly modified to cover up missed security audits, raising immediate criminal liability issues under California Penal Code Section 470 regarding document falsification, forgery, and unauthorized contract execution. Meanwhile, the company's external public relations firm issued a pathetic public statement claiming routine scheduled maintenance, which backfired horribly on social media when angry clients posted screenshots of dead portals and tagged regulatory agencies. By 7 o'clock that evening, our largest corporate client, a major national retail distributor, served Vantage Logistics with a formal notice of intent to sue for breach of service-level agreements, claiming tens of millions of dollars in direct operational damages. Desperate to contain the exploding crisis, Sienna began frantically calling my personal cell phone. When I did not answer, she sent 5 consecutive emails pleading for assistance, followed by direct messages on professional networking platforms. She even went so far as to send a $5 digital payment transfer to my personal bank account with a note attached that read, "Please answer your phone. We need your help right now." I took a clear screenshot of her desperate payment message for my legal records, placed my phone back on the coffee shop table, and quietly ordered a second cup of dark roast coffee. I allowed every single one of her frantic messages to remain unread, watching the rain wash over the glass window while the full consequences of arrogant corporate nepotism played out across the street. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the board of directors of Vantage Logistics convened an emergency closed-door session. The fallout from the infrastructure collapse was swift, devastating, and absolute. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented by corporate legal counsel and independent financial auditors, the board voted unanimously to place Sienna Vance on immediate, unpaid administrative leave, pending a formal federal investigation into breach of fiduciary duty, gross corporate negligence, and the unlawful dissipation of corporate assets. The board also initiated a formal inquiry into CEO Richard Vance's executive oversight, questioning how he could have permitted his daughter-in-law to dismantle critical enterprise security frameworks without proper board authorization or technical vetting. Chad Vance was also stripped of his executive privileges after auditors found he had signed off on unverified cloud invoices without reviewing budget allocations. While the executive suite at Vantage Logistics was collapsing under the weight of shareholder outrage and impending federal litigation, my own professional life took an immediate dramatic turn for the better. At 10 o'clock that same morning, a courier delivered a sealed leather envelope to my front porch. Inside was a formal employment proposal from Strata Systems, the premier enterprise technology consulting firm in the region and our former chief competitor. Strata Systems had been trying to recruit me for over 3 years, recognizing the true value of my technical expertise. Their executive vice president of engineering called me personally, offering a 6-month executive consulting retainer, double my previous salary, a substantial equity stake, complete architectural autonomy, full remote flexibility, and explicit corporate recognition of all my personal intellectual property rights. I signed the contract within 5 minutes, welcoming a new era of professional respect and financial reward. Strata Systems set up my home office with state-of-the-art hardware, treating my technical knowledge with the high regard it deserved and hosting a warm welcome reception in my honor. 3 weeks later, the ultimate legal hammer fell upon the leadership of Vantage Logistics. A major institutional shareholder group filed a federal class action lawsuit against CEO Richard Vance, Chad Vance, and Sienna Vance, alleging catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty, gross mismanagement, and intentional dissipation of corporate assets that resulted in a 40% crash in company stock value. Shortly thereafter, a federal process server arrived at my home to hand-deliver a formal legal subpoena. The United States District Court requested my presence as an expert technical witness to provide sworn testimony and present documented server audit records, detailing how executive negligence had destroyed the company's digital infrastructure. Top corporate litigation attorneys spent 2 days preparing my expert witness testimony, noting that the federal court judge was appalled by the total lack of corporate governance and blatant nepotism at Vantage Logistics. As I sat in the quiet study of my new home in Napa Valley, looking out over the rolling vineyards while sipping a hot mug of morning coffee, my laptop chimed with one final incoming email. The message was sent directly from the personal account of CEO Richard Vance. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk, Walter. Please help us save the company." In the body of the email, Richard offered me a massive executive vice president title, a quadrupled salary package, and full control over the entire IT department if I would return immediately to rebuild the collapsed systems and decline to testify in the pending shareholder lawsuit. He promised that Sienna and Chad would be permanently removed from all corporate affairs. I read the email once, feeling neither anger nor petty malice, but rather the profound, clean clarity of a professional who knew his true worth and had proven it beyond all shadow of doubt. I did not type a heated response, did not forward the email to the press, and did not engage in pointless corporate debate. I simply clicked the delete button, purging his desperate plea permanently from my inbox. I closed my laptop, walked out onto the sunlit veranda, and took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. True power does not come from loud executive titles or arrogant corporate declarations. Sometimes, true power is simply the quiet aftermath of truth, walking away from a burning bridge you did not light and savoring every second of the peace you earned.